The Man Who Played with Time. Written by A.W. Burnell, told to you by Edward E. French. Perhaps you recall the disappearance of Austin J. Bramus? Yes, the scientist, the inventor. Remember? It was on the evening of April 19, 1930, that he encountered his most unbelievable fate, his incredible doom. They say I killed him, murdered him in cold blood. But I never. But they say I killed him and they put me here because of it. How could I murder him? He was my friend. We had known each other since childhood, went to school together. That is, we did until we graduated from high school. He went on through college while I worked here in town. But after leaving college, Austin had his laboratory built just 3 short blocks from my shop, and we renewed our friendship. I suppose I was the only real friend he had. He was a little eccentric in his ways, and people usually avoid eccentric folks that aren't famous, don't they? Anyhow, Austin used to leave it to me to make all the parts for any new invention of his. And his inventions were new, too. Why, the things he could turn out would have surprised the patent office officials, and they've seen some mighty queer machines. Austin's head was always full of strange ideas. He'd develop some fantastic idea in his mind until it would result in the creation of a bizarre theory. Then he'd construct a machine to test the theory. But allow me to tell you my story, won't you? Let me convince you of my innocence, please. Listen to me, and I'll tell you the true story of the death of Austin J. Bramus. Tell you how he was mortally wounded by the arrow of an unknown savage in the year of our Lord, 1492. For nearly a year before Austin's death, he had been working on a new idea which kept me busy making the odds and ends he required. After I had finished the last of the pieces for him, he went into seclusion for some time. Then one day, the day on which he was to meet his death, he asked me to drop in at his laboratory to see what he had been working on. As soon as I could manage it, which was immediately, I closed shop and rushed over to Austin's place. Curiosity has always been a failing of mine. He was waiting for me in his little living room, a small cubicle containing a gas plate, 3 chairs, a couple of tiny tables, and a bed. Adjoining this place was his laboratory, a vast room filled with every type of apparatus a scientist needs. As I closed the massive front door behind me, Austin greeted me with, "What in the world kept you? You've been at least 5 minutes." His voice was jubilant. He was in excellent spirits. As he wrung his hands, I noticed with increasing apprehension that my friend's usually boyish face was a bit thin and drawn. His broad shoulders sagged as though carrying a load. He rubbed a greasy hand on his massive laboratory apron, then vainly strove to brush his long, chestnut-colored hair away from his eyes. All the while I eyed his 6-foot form in silent disapproval. "Oh, I suppose I do look sort of all in," Austin declared, noting the expression on my face. "But how can I eat or sleep when I'm on the track of something really big? Listen, my boy." "Whoa, first we have a bite to eat and a little rest," I interrupted. I knew that when he began by buoying me, he was about to explain something to me, but I wanted him to eat first. He worried me, looking so pale and fatigued. "All right," he agreed. "I am a bit hungry. I haven't eaten since yesterday." While he relaxed in the one easy chair the room contained, I busied myself preparing a hasty meal. During the repast, I avoided all subjects scientific for fear Austin would forget he was eating and commence a discussion about some topic relating to his latest creation. After eating, while I cleared the table, Bramus began with, "Tell me, what is time?" "Well," I replied, I know it's what clocks tell, but outside of that I can't exactly explain what it is." "Nor can anyone else. Professors may use any amount of 6-syllable words, but when it comes to stating just what time really is, they'll just sputter and say nothing. They can't explain time because There is no such thing as time. Surely, though, I put in, time is existent. It just is. It has to be. There you are wrong, my boy. Time is merely a name that man has invented to denote different phases of his life. You say there is a past, present, and future, do you not? Yes. I say there is the present and nothing but the present. You'll have to explain, I said, lighting a cigarette. Time. We'll call it time for want of a better word. Time is like a series of 3 rooms, all adjoining each other, but the doors connecting them are locked. In the center room are the things, the creatures which make up our modern age. This room is today. The room on the right is yesterday. It contains the past. The room on the left of today is tomorrow. In it lies the future. We are in the room of today. We are moving. We live. But the contents of the other 2 rooms are also alive. Have we any right, then, to say that because the other rooms are behind and ahead of us, they are not existent? Just because we are unable to open the doors and step into these rooms, why is that sufficient reason to declare them non-existent? We live in this room. Dinosaurs dwell in the other. Merely because they are not in this room is no proof that they are in the dead, forgotten past, now is it? We live simultaneously, the dinosaurs and you and I, but on account of the locked doors between us, we think that there are no such creatures alive today, do we not? For proof to substantiate their statements, the fools will say, well, where are these things you speak of? Can you point out a few? Those doubting idiots forget that their pitifully incompetent senses are not to be relied upon, and they do not know quite everything. I have studied the problem and have reached a conclusion. By mathematics, you understand, not by my eyes. I have proved that the future and the past are existing at this moment. I believed I saw a fallacy in his theory. For theory, I could only believe it was, not able to believe that he had actually proved such an incredible hypothesis. But, I said, you are assuming that there are 3 rooms where there is only 1. We are here on the identical spot where a million years ago some long-necked, whatchamacallit, wallowed in a patch of mud. According to your theory, both of us are here at the same moment, which is, of course, quite impossible. You know very well that 2 solids cannot occupy the same space at the same time. Therefore, my friend, whose face was once more calm, interrupted me with, "And how do you know we are solid, my boy?" He laughed at the expression on my face and continued, "You know, even we, with our poor weak brains, can create a person in our minds, one who seems to be a perfectly rational being, by concentration. And mightn't this being think for himself, although it is through the direction of his Creator's brain? That is, when we think of this fellow, we think of him as doing something. Say, for example, rowing a boat. Now, perhaps this imaginary entity thinks he is rowing around the lake of his own accord, has a reason for doing so that appears to be logical to him. Yet it is our thought all the time that is directing him to do so. But, I put in, when we cease thinking of this fellow, why, he disappears. Then again, while this fellow is rowing his boat, suppose we suddenly change our thought. In a flash, he will probably be walking down the street or doing some such thing that is in no way connected with rowing. I never see humans act that way. You forget that the brain which creates us is infinitely more powerful than our brains. And have you never heard that if a group of strong minds concentrate long and hard enough, they can materialize a living being? Of course, that is merely a theory, but mightn't it have its origin in actual fact? Many East Indians would swear that such a thing could be done. But the point is, maybe the imaginary man is just as solid as we are. If that be true, then while he is in our brains, the tissues do not give way for him. And there you'd have a case of 2 things being in the same spot at the same time, would you not? As I stood staring dumbly at him, Austin continued, "Another thing. We see a baby on the floor, playing. We rapidly think of his future life. Think of what he will experience when he grows up. We outline his life for him. We can actually picture him, a man, working, say, in an office. Yet there he is, still a baby on the floor. We have gone into the future for 20 years. Yet we are in the present all the time. Here I managed to put in a few words. Nonsense, Austin. That isn't going into the future at all. Why, the baby may even die or be killed long before he reaches manhood. I admit that the baby would probably never follow the life we pictured for him, but, and here's the most important point, the marvelous mind which created our universe and all the others in the great void of space would surely be able to foresee and direct the lives of the inhabitants of these universes. That wouldn't be so hard as it seems for a vastly powerful mind. You see that there are a number of types in each and every city which are duplicated and reduplicated, and these types lead similar lives. So, thinking for one, this mind would think for all that are classified in a certain type. Now, of course, by giving each creature a brain of his own, these creations, while following generally the life plan for certain types, can also think for themselves and so change their planned lives a bit, just as if you invented a game determining the moves of the pieces and then letting each piece play itself. It seems as if I had wandered from my subject, but I merely wished to demonstrate the possible correctness of my theory. As for the baby, accepting my theory, you will see that his life is, in a sense, mapped out for him. Now, if we have a machine which travels in the dimension of time, we can see into the future as readily as into the past. At least, we may see the future as it will be, or rather is being, enacted at the present moment. I looked at my friend. He was not smiling, but deeply in earnest. Had he been working too hard, and was his mind unbalanced? I laughed at this thought. My laugh sounded harsh and out of place, so I immediately stifled it. The silence was growing uncomfortable to me, so I spoke. By the way, Austin, what was it you had to show me now that you're through propounding theories? I lighted the cigarette I had just taken from the pack in my hand. Surely you haven't invented a machine or something that will take you voyaging through time, or perhaps the fourth dimension? I added with a smile. Austin pierced me with his gaze. Yes, I have. Those things which I had you make were for just such a purpose. With them I have constructed a time traveler. You what? I shrieked, and stepping backward upset a small table, sending it crashing to the floor. Flushing a little at my awkwardness, I hastily righted the table while my friend laughed good-naturedly. Arthur, if smoking affects you in that manner, you must stop it. But honestly now, time-traveling doesn't really stun you, does it? Surely you've heard me speak of its probability hundreds of times. But come, see for yourself. He entered his laboratory, returning in a few moments wheeling a strange contrivance before him. In response to my questioning gaze, he stated that he wished to show me something humorous that it would be impossible to see in the laboratory. As I stared at the complicated mass of machinery before me, a peculiar feeling stole over me, a feeling that somehow there was something queer about this contraption. In a moment I saw what it was, and I gasped. Parts of the apparatus faded into thin air. Here, a solid, tangible rod would become gradually transparent, finally to vanish utterly. There, seemingly suspended in mid-air, was a round piece of brass. Yet it could not be doubted that the invisible part of the shiny rod supported the yellow object. Wheels, rods, cones, balls, all colors of the rainbow gleamed at me coldly. Used though I was to machinery of all kinds, I was bewildered by this intricate mechanism. Supported on all this was a stone platform of some sort, pearly white in the center. Streaks of rose tinged the rounded edges. From the middle of the stone rose a steel pedestal ending in a flat black surface. On it were 2 dials and a small switch. Arranged in a complete circle around each dial-controlled pointer were a series of tiny numerals. The numbers around the larger of the 2 dials ran by thousands, from 1 to 2 millions. The pointer stood at 1 million. Grouped about the smaller dial were the numerals from 1 to 1,000, with a space of 10 between the figures. Close to the pedestal was a lever which was so situated that it could be shoved into one of the 10 slots at will. I immediately understood these things to be the controlling apparatus for the traveler. By merely setting the dials, adjusting the lever, and pressing the switch, one could send the machine into either the past or the future. Naturally, the first model, is rather crude and faulty, although perfectly safe to travel in. As I began to edge away, I see, Art, that you have not outgrown your cautiousness, even after all these years. But as I was saying, there are many trifling mechanical discrepancies to be overcome. Probably the most obvious of these is that the finest adjustment of this model is in years. I see. The first stop possible is exactly 1 year in the past or future, as the case may be, and the next would be 1 year from that. As my friend nodded his acquiescence, I asked, "How is this contraption made? And what makes it go?" "That is my secret," responded Austin. "But you have only to think of time as a road extending into infinity to grasp the fundamental idea of the thing. If you are in an automobile, you step on the accelerator, and immediately you travel over the asphalt until you reach an entirely different place than that from which you started, right? Well, in this case, a person has merely to set the dials, throw the switch, and a different place on the road of time is reached." I don't quite understand," I remarked. "You tell me to imagine time as a road. One moves forward or backward on a road in order to reach a new place. But time?" Austin smiled. "Arthur, have you ever heard of the fourth dimension? Well, by using the fourth dimension as a direction, and with a machine suitable for traveling into this dimension, one may move up and down on the road of time as easily as one travels on any other road."
Yes, but where in the name of everything under the sun is this fourth dimension?
What other direction is there but forward, backward, up or down? I admit that it is rather difficult for you to accept the fact that there is a dimension of existence at right angles with the other three, which can neither be seen nor pictured in the mind. Even I, after having built a vehicle that travels in this dimension, cannot completely comprehend it. But then there are so many things in this world that are utterly impossible for us to understand. Life, for instance. Why are we here? Why were we created in the first place? Why, my boy, here I interrupted my friend, for I knew that if he once got started on his pet problem, nothing could stop him, not even the demonstration of his time traveler. "Austin, weren't you explaining the fourth dimension to me?" I put it gently. He ceased speaking, and as he realized how he had strayed from his subject, his cheeks grew red. Then we both laughed. He again took up the original theme of conversation. "As I said before, it is impossible to explain or describe the fourth dimension to a person who has never in his life known more than three. It is the same proposition as explaining and describing the third dimension to a two-dimensional being. The best, in fact the only method of explanation in either case is demonstration. Come, and I shall show you what it is to travel through time in the fourth dimension," I faltered. "Are you sure there's no danger? Yes, I know. You're still the old cautious John of school days, aren't you?" Then, as I stepped reluctantly onto the platform beside the young inventor, he added, "But I see that your curiosity even yet gets the better of your caution. Then am I to understand that what is known as time is the fourth dimension?" I queried, as Brahmas made a few trifling adjustments to the mechanism of his machine. "By no means. The fourth dimension is merely the means by which we may have access to the road of time. It is merely the direction in which we travel to gain the future or regain the past. A good illustration of my point is giving the means of traveling in the third dimension to a two-dimensional creature. But enough of this confusing talk. Let's take a little voyage. Which would you rather see first, the past or the future?" "Well, I think the past would be good enough for a starter. The future might prove to be too much of a shock to one who is unused to playing around with time. All right. How far back would you care to go? How about 1917? The World War?" Brahmas scratched his chin. "I can't show you any battle scenes because we're in America. To see the actual fighting, it would, of course, be necessary to go to Europe. But we'll take a look at what was, or rather is, happening here on the evening of April 19, 1917. To say that I felt nervous would be understating the facts. If anything should happen to us, supposing we should be marooned in the primeval past. But Austin had assured me that it was perfectly safe, and he would not have said so if it weren't. Besides, he had probably made several voyages himself with perfect security, and it would be gratifying to one's curiosity to see the actual past being relived before one's eyes. So I let him set the dials and slip the lever into the proper notch without saying anything. Oh, if I had only known what was to happen! If I had only persuaded my friend to give up his playing with time! Now it is too late. But I mustn't go on like this. That is all past now. I'll go on with my tale, if you so desire. See, Austin was saying, the year 1917 is 13 past, isn't it? Now, to reach that year, it is necessary to turn this small dial until it points to 10, leaving the larger dial untouched. Then, after inserting the lever into the third slot, we are ready to close the switch by throwing it to the left. So, and commence our journey. When Austin clicked the switch over, a sound of well-oiled machinery whirred softly in my ears. The platform on which we stood began vibrating gently beneath us. Faster and faster it vibrated, while a queer feeling stole over me. I felt almost as though I were in a swiftly descending elevator. Then I seemed to see Austin and myself regarding a duplicate of the machine on which we now stood. Suddenly, the scene became obscured by several huge bubbles of azure hue, revolving easily in a circular motion. Without a sound, they burst before my fascinated eyes, sending lazy tinted streamers floating, swaying to the floor, darkening my view of the laboratory. End of Part 1. The Man Who Played with Time by A.W. Burnell. Told to you by Edward E. French. A copyright exists on all recordings issued by Edward E. French. Inquiries should be addressed to email edwardfrench06@hotmail.com. That's edwardfrench06@hotmail.com. Thanks for listening.